Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and I wanted to just share some things from my perspective in our week 3 as we go into week 3 of the Southwestern Borderlands class that might prove helpful to you as we move forward. First of all, I wanted to comment on your book analysis that I just graded and turned back to you last evening. And I think this is a great time to talk about thinking about who the customer is, basically, for lack of a better term, or the reader of such an analysis. That's always a good point to start any writing assignment, is to assess who's going to be reading it and for what purposes. In an analysis, many times it'll be a researcher who's reading your work because they don't have time to read every text in their research, and they're wanting a kind of a down and dirty, quick look at what's in the text and see if there's something that it might impact what they're researching. And so it does need to be clear. It needs to be to the point. It needs to be very quick. But it's also a great example of you considering your audience when you're writing. Always consider the kind of writing that you're doing in each case. And I think that's a great example. Some of you need to probably rethink that more clearly as you write and go forward. Overall, the work was pretty good. And I want you to go back and look at feedback and incorporate that into your next writing assignment, because writing is so important to a historian. You might say, well, why do we need to learn to write when we're in a history class and it's not my major? There is not a major on the planet that does not involve writing and communications. And we live in a ever increasingly important age of communication. So you need to be able to do it and do it well, whether you're writing a history paper or whether you're writing something else. The one thing to remember in history is that history is a much more concise form of writing than, say, an English paper where you use adjectives and adverbs and all these great swelling words. In history, you get to the point. It's very concise, to the point, clear. You get in, get out, and move on. So that's something to think about. This week, we are talking about the effects that the coming of the Spaniards will have in the Southwest Borderlands on the native populations. I'm struck each time I teach this class over the differences between the Eastern Native Americans and the Western Native Americans. I've taught the Eastern history a number of times, and it's a very different world. Number one, it's a different environment, and the environment will have a lot to do with it because the Western lands are mostly desert. If you've ever flown across the West going to California, you're just amazed at how it goes on forever and ever. It's just one desert after the other. Lack of water resources is going to always have an issue, are going to be an issue with dealing with populations that live in these areas. And they still today, water is a huge issue, even in the larger metropolitan areas like Los Angeles. They have to take their water from Hoover Dam, and they move it for miles and miles to get it to the city, and it takes a lot of water to keep people abreast. That also affected the agriculture, and of course we know that Native Americans moved from a hunting and gathering kind of a lifestyle, and that's probably what brought them to North America over the Bering Strait. And as they settled around these areas and became much more sedentary, the need for water was also important. And so many of the Southwestern Native Americans got into irrigation and irrigating their crops, and so they could grow something, and so they didn't have to be quite so movable, and of course they had bison and other things, but the desert was always there. The desert was huge, and it limited their movement somewhat in that they did not have a way to get across the desert. There were no horses until the Spaniards came, and so they lived at these remote areas around the deserts. And once horses became a viable means of transportation, they could carry water to take a journey, to take a trip. And so that was a major thing to be thought about. The Spaniards, of course, are initially occupied in what's now Central Americas, the Mexico and in that area, because of the gold they found and the silver that they found. And of course, we can go all the way back to Columbus, and you really need to look at Columbus's journal logs and see what his first impressions were of Native Americans, because they become the accepted view for hundreds of years, well into the 1800s. People still looked at them as noble savages or just savages, because his writings got published in travel journals, and they became great reading in Europe with the advent of printing, which is about the same time that Columbus was here, within 8 or 10 years. Printing it with movable type is going to become a major boon to the publishing industry. People are going to want to learn to read because they have something to read. And so these travel journals of these different explorers are going to become like the bestseller list in New York. So they were quite interesting. So those views that are transcribed upon the Native American people are going to be the views that are lasting. There are really an interesting book out called Rivers of Gold right now that is a good read about what happened with the Spaniards and the Native Americans in Central and South America, in that they converted them to Christianity at the end of a sword and then worked them to death in the gold and silver mines. And we do know that they brought out tremendous amounts of gold and silver, in fact, to the point that they set up a minting operation near the coast of Florida, where they went ahead and minted the coin, and they shipped coin basically. And we found a number of galleons at the bottom of the sea that sank in storms that were filled with these gold doubloons and other pieces. But they soon had worked all these people to death. And this book, Rivers of Gold, raises the issue that they send back word to Spain and say that we've killed off all the people, the native people that are here. Where are we going to get workers? And they advised them to go to the Bahamas in that area. And when they went there, those workers had already been worked to death as well in the sugarcane plantations. And so the next advice was to go to Africa and bring Africans to do the labor. So what may surprise some of you is that African slavery actually started by the Spanish in South America, and all the way through the slave issues, there were always more African slaves in South America, especially in the Bahamas and in Brazil, than there ever was in North America. And their lives were very different there. They lasted in the sugarcane plantations, lasted about 6 months because they were worked to death very quickly. So basically, that's the story of slavery. The Spaniards are also exploring the northern regions, looking for gold. They explore south and run into the Incas and the Mayans. And there's a very interesting document that I'll try to put up for you to read on what happened to the Mayan culture and how it disappeared. It may have been an ecological disaster, but the fact is that it was quite interesting. They suddenly disappeared historically, and we don't know where they went to. But there are numbers of explorers that go into what is now North America. One in particular of the Spaniards came through, LaSalle came through the South, and we have records from the Cherokee, who were smart enough to hide all of their things of value and play poor for the days that this Spanish expedition was in the country and scouting. They didn't find any gold, anything of wealth, and so they just marked the area off as poor and worthless, and that's why the Spanish held on to Florida, but they never moved really up the East Coast at all. They became a thorn in the side of the English and will eventually give Florida up in one of the peace treaties after the wars. But they basically don't see anything here of any use, and they explore. He comes up and explores, and actually there is an interesting story of that. One guy from the expedition remains behind in what is now Georgia to mine, to look for gold. And why anyone would do that, knowing there's nothing else here, there's no Walmart or CVS or Walgreens or any place to live or sleep or buy food or buy clothing or anything, and he stays behind to mine, to look for gold, and nobody ever hears from him again. So either he assimilated in with the Native Americans or he died by some means. At any rate, other explorers will explore much more the Texas area, the Southwest that we're now dealing with. You're going to see many of these, and they bring lots of changes with them. They introduce horses for one thing, which are going to rapidly change the lifestyle of the Plains Indians, and will give them a means of transportation, a means of warfare. Basically, a horse is a technology. And literally, a friend of mine and I are looking at doing a cottage course on the history of the horse and warfare, which is really interesting. But these journals lead us with some very interesting firsthand information about the Native Americans in the Southwest. So this week, as you prepare your materials and read your materials, be sure you read carefully and look at these materials and think about what we've talked about here in this short perspective, and then continue to do your work. I think you'll find it enriching, gratifying, and you'll learn a lot about the southwestern borderlands. Thank you.